Good morning, evening, or night, wherever you are. Welcome to WHAM today. Take a deep breath, clear your mind, and let's drift through the whispers of today's world, one quiet thought at a time. As we wrap up Thursday, 12th June 25, let's see what stories are unfolding around us. India. A devastating Air India Boeing 787-8 Dreamliner, operating as Flight I-171 en route to London Gatwick, tragically crashed shortly after departing from Ahmedabad, claiming the lives of over 260 individuals, including 241 passengers and crew. The 11-year-old aircraft, carrying 242 people, plummeted into a residential area and a medical college campus near the airport just 5 minutes after takeoff, resulting in additional casualties on the ground. Amidst the wreckage, Vishwas Kumar Ramesh, a 40-year-old British man seated in a Lavina, remarkably survived. Safety experts are poised to investigate the crash's cause, with initial inquiries focusing on whether the plane encountered difficulties during its ascent. This marks the first such incident for the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, a widely used aircraft with over 1,100 jets currently in service, nearly 36 of which are operated by Air India. The Tata Group, having recently acquired Air India, now confronts significant challenges in its plans to revitalize the airline following this catastrophe. In other news, the Indian Coast Guard is working diligently to tow a burning container ship away from the coast of Kerala, aiming to avert a potential ecological disaster. Furthermore, Exercise Shakti 2025, a collaborative military exercise between India and France, is scheduled to commence on June 18 in Cavalerie, France. The Dalai Lama, presently residing in Dharamsala, intends to announce his succession plan on July 6, a move designed to preempt potential interference from China in the selection process. Separately, Air India Flight 423 from New Delhi to Ahmedabad landed 20 minutes early and was parked for over 2 hours before the ill-fated flight I-171. United States. Dr. Bobby Mukamala, a physician of Indian heritage, has achieved a milestone by being sworn in as the president of the American Medical Association, a historic for the organization. Meanwhile, in New Jersey, Pranav Patel, an Indian origin individual, received a sentence of 6 years and 3 months in U.S. federal prison for his involvement in a conspiracy to commit money laundering. The Boeing 787 Dreamliner crash in India occurred weeks after Boeing reached an agreement with the U.S. government to avoid criminal responsibility for crashes in 2018 and 2019. United Kingdom. British Gujaratis residing in Harrow, located in northwest London, are in mourning following the Air India flight I-171 crash. Local Labour councillor Anika Shah-Levy has acknowledged the community's deep shock and anxiety as they seek information and come to terms with the tragedy. Bangladesh. From Bangladesh, we learn that Yunus referenced an informal diplomatic note to India seeking the extradition of deposed Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. China has approved a number of rare earth export licenses, considering the needs of other countries' civilian sectors, even as key U.S. industries rely on magnets, largely sourced from China. Beijing, heavily reliant on Myanmar for rare earth metals and oxides used in magnet production for critical goods, has been strategically drawing out negotiations with the U.S. to build its strengths, leveraging its control over these critical minerals. Following Britain, China has struck a trade deal with the U.S., which President Trump announced, essentially undoing some of the damage from the trade war. In London, U.S. and Chinese negotiators reached a framework agreement to activate the Geneva deal during 2 days of talks that included discussions on the impact of AI on jobs. Beijing hopes for closer ties with the Vatican after Pope Leo named Joseph Lin Yunchuan as an auxiliary bishop in Fuzhou, following an agreement that bishops must be approved by both sides. China's Pierre daily criticized America's planned Golden Dome space-based missile defense system, warning it could threaten global strategic stability and trigger a space arms race. The Communist Party, General Chushi, praised PopMart, the company behind the viral Labu toy, for its creativity and success. China plans to remove tariffs on nearly all goods from African nations, except Eswatini, to provide duty-free access to its market, an announcement made during a forum on China-Africa cooperation in Beijing. Chinese ambassador to France Deng Li visited the China pavilion at Paris Vivatech and showed particular interest in metal parts produced by specialized 3D printers. The PLA daily advocated for the large-scale deployment of unmanned combat forces at key locations to leverage their potential in future conflicts. Shanghai Jiao Tong University's CHIPS announced production of 6-inch wafers for thin-film lithium niobate, TFN, photonic chips, which could lead to advances in AI, 6G, and quantum computing. Premierlica Distillequaithof Mutai is complying with Beijing's mandate for austerity by distancing its products from extravagance. TikTok's sister app Douyin is lowering deposit fees for merchants to attract new sellers amidst fierce competition. Archaeologists suggest that pigs were domesticated in southern China around 8,000 years ago, based on research conducted at 2 early Neolithic sites in the Yangtze Delta region. Western degrees are losing their prestige as Chinese returnees face a harsh job market. Turning to the United States, the U.S. struck a trade deal with China following Britain, which President Trump announced. This new trade deal essentially undoes some of the damage from the trade war initiated by President Trump. In London, U.S. and Chinese negotiators reached a framework agreement to activate the Geneva deal during 2 days of talks that included discussions on the impact of AI on jobs. The U.S. is in discussions with Pakistan regarding crypto, critical minerals, and China. During Pakistan Army Chief General Asim Muni's visit to Washington, D.C., where he is expected to attend the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary celebrations on June 14. NVIDIA is attempting to expand in European markets with new partnerships and a pledge to build AI factories, facing declining sales in China due to U.S. export control. The European Union is still facing tariff issues. NVIDIA is attempting to expand in European markets with new partnerships and a pledge to build AI factories, facing declining sales in China due to U.S. export control. Meanwhile, in Hong Kong, China Labor Bulletin, a Hong Kong-based rights group that tracked worker unrest in China, is shutting down due to financial difficulties. The organization was founded by Han Dongfang. In Myanmar, Beijing is heavily reliant on Myanmar for rare earth metals and oxides to produce magnets for critical goods. Across the African continent, China plans to remove tariffs on nearly all goods from African nations except Eswatini to provide duty-free access to its market, an announcement made during a forum on China-Africa cooperation in Beijing. Finally, in Pakistan, Army Chief General Asim Munir is visiting Washington, D.C., and is expected to attend the U.S. Army's 250th anniversary celebrations on June 14. Discussions are expected to cover crypto, critical minerals, and China. Iran and Israel are embroiled in escalating tensions, underscored by Israeli strikes targeting Iranian assets. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has declared that these strikes will persist to thwart Iran's nuclear ambitions. Israel is preparing for potential retaliation, including siren alerts. In Tel Aviv, former President Donald Trump cautioned of a massive conflict if nuclear talks falter and confirmed the evacuation of some U.S. personnel amid concerns of an Israeli strike and Iranian counterattack. The U.S. Secretary of State has warned Iran against targeting U.S. assets, affirming the protection of American forces, but clarifying that the U.S. was not involved in the Israeli strikes. The UN Nuclear Watchdog's Board of Governors concluded that Iran is not complying with its nuclear obligations, marking the first such finding in 20 years, determining on June 12 that Iran's nuclear program had breached the terms of a 1974 agreement for the first time since 2006. In response, Iran announced a new enrichment site and reaffirmed its right to uranium enrichment, stating, "It will not compromise on this issue." A sixth round of nuclear negotiations between Iran and the U.S. is scheduled for June 15 in Muscat, mediated by Oman. Turning to China, the Chinese embassy in Tehran has issued a warning to Chinese citizens and businesses. The embassy urged them to monitor the situation and take precautions given the severe and complicated security environment following the recent Israeli airstrikes and explosions in Iran. Japan and China are engaged in a dispute following an incident in the Pacific. A Chinese J-15 fighter jet allegedly approached within 45 meters of a Japanese patrol plane. Japan expressed serious concern and cautioned against future dangerous maneuvers. China dismissed Japan's concerns and accused Japan of dangerous actions. Domestically, Japan postponed a decision regarding political donation reviews. The Japan News Media Association committed to accurate election coverage and urged social media to combat fake news. Agriculture. Minister Shinjiro Koizumi announced an earlier auction date of June 27. For imported rice, rugby coach Eddie Jones plans to leverage Japan's hot weather to beat Wales, admitting his past errors. Turning to the United States, tariff negotiations with Japan remain unresolved. A meeting between Ishiba and U.S. President Donald Trump is anticipated, though a deal is not assured. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced Operation Rising Lion, targeting Iran's nuclear program, military commanders, and scientists, including the Natanz enrichment facility. Netanyahu affirmed the operation's indefinite continuation. In response, Iranian state television reported the death of the head of Iran's paramilitary Revolutionary Guard following an Israeli attack. New Zealand's Prime Minister Christopher Luxon called Israel's preemptive strike on Iran potentially catastrophic. Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong expressed alarm over the strikes, warning of regional destabilization and advocating for dialogue. Turning to the Israel-Hamas war, the Gaza Health Ministry reported over 55,000 Palestinian deaths, with women and children comprising more than half. Israel admitted supporting armed Palestinian groups to counter Hamas. Sweden's Foreign Minister Maria Malmer Stenergard condemned Israel's starvation tactics in Gaza as a war crime, asserting humanitarian aid should remain apolitical. At the UN, the General Assembly overwhelmingly voted for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. Israel's UN ambassador accused the General Assembly of blood libel and a farce. In Argentina, President Javier Milei received Israel's Genesis Prize in Jerusalem, recognized for his support of Israel during its international isolation, stemming from the Gaza war. Austria witnessed a tragic school shooting in Graz, where a 21-year-old former student killed 10 people before committing suicide. The attacker, who had been rejected by the army following a failed psychological evaluation, meticulously planned the assault. Authorities are now investigating how he acquired a gun permit despite his psychological assessment results. Early police investigations suggest the gunman was heavily involved in online first-person shooter game. Across Europe, factory farming is rapidly expanding, with over 24,000 new intensive livestock farms established. The UK accounts for a significant portion of this growth, hosting 1824 of these industrial-scale pig and poultry farms. Chinese firms, including Huawei Technologies and Unitree Robotics, are increasing their presence at a European technology show in Paris. This move suggests China's desire to enhance technological collaboration with France, even as tensions persist with the US. Meanwhile, in the US, President Donald Trump has shifted his stance on international students, vowing to support Chinese students in the US and ease their path to remaining in the country after graduation. The U.S. Defense Secretary, Pete Hegseth, has announced to Congress that he will engage lawmakers in a 30-day review of the AUKUS alliance, which involves the United States, Britain, and Australia. NATO Secretary General urged European nations to increase their defense spending at a meeting of foreign ministers in Rome. Security and the situation in Ukraine were primary discussion points. Italy's foreign minister, Antonio Tajani, admitted the need for increased defense spending. He estimated it would take at least 10 years for Italy to meet NATO targets. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio reaffirmed the United States' commitment to supporting the Russian people's aspiration. He also reiterated calls for peace with Ukraine on Russia Day. Russian forces have maintained their attacks on Ukraine, deploying drones and other weaponry. These attacks resulted in 3 deaths and numerous injuries, despite international calls for a ceasefire. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky reported incremental gains by Ukrainian forces in pushing Russian forces out of the Sumy region. The Transcarpathia region of Ukraine, including Uzhhorod, has experienced relatively few Russian attacks over the past 3 years. Residents reported a different wartime experience compared to other parts of the country. Turning to the United Kingdom, Brewed, a Chinese automotive manufacturer, has launched its most affordable electric vehicle, the Dolphin Cirque. Prices start at £18,650 sterling. This launch is part of Brewed's strategy to overtake Tesla as the world's leading electric car manufacturer. Australia is currently investigating the death of a man in Adelaide who died in a hospital 2 weeks after being arrested and held in police custody. In other news, a trench collapse in Victoria led to a single fatality. Liberal Senator Maria Kovacic is advocating for coalition MPs to embrace net zero policies, citing the need to address climate change and its associated environmental and economic threats to Australia. Kovacic specifically cautioned against disputing the scientific consensus on climate change. Despite a Pentagon review, Australia's defense minister has downplayed concerns about the stability of the multi-billion-dollar submarine agreement with the US and Britain. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is expected to meet with US President Donald Trump at the upcoming Day 7 meeting held in Canada, and confidence remains high that the US will continue with the Biden-era submarine pact after the review. Shifting gears, Chinese scientist Shi Niemann, famed for his evolutionary structural optimization (ESO) method, is leaving Australia after several decades to return to China. United States Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem's press conference in Los Angeles, meant to address immigration enforcement protests in California and liberate the city, faced immediate disruption. Federal agents forcibly removed and handcuffed Senator Alex Padilla, a Democratic senator from California. This action ignited outrage among Democrats. A judge has temporarily barred President Trump from deploying National Guard troops in Los Angeles, overruling Governor Newsom's objections. Panelists believe this unrest could divert President Trump's attention from China policies. This shift may cause Beijing to reassess its strategy when dealing with the United States. Turning to the Pacific Islands, warming ocean temperatures present a serious threat to tuna fishing. Tuna represents a critical revenue source for nations like the Solomon Islands. Tuna populations are migrating eastward due to these rising temperatures. New Zealand is grappling with drug-related challenges and potential risks in the Pacific area. The nation has seen a decline in its global gender equality, ranking for the first time in 4 years, although officials insist its overall standing remains robust. Turning to immigration policies, the Prime Minister is defending the Parent Boost visa program, despite criticism that its minimum income threshold could exclude many Pacific Islanders, as highlighted by Auckland barrister Nelisoni Tupu. In law enforcement news from Gore, police discovered almost 500 firearms at a single location, marking one of the largest weapons seizures ever. Pakistan is in talks with China to buy advanced weaponry. Anti-ballistic missiles, airborne early warning platforms, and stealth fighters are included. This move aims to strengthen Pakistan's air defenses after a clash with India. The country is also cracking down on Afghan refugees. Some families face short deadlines to leave. A Pakistani parliamentary delegation visited the U.S., meeting with officials like Undersecretary Alison Hooker. The U.S. government made no comment on Pakistan's pledge to fight terrorism. Pakistan is also enduring a severe heat wave. Temperatures in the north exceeded 45 degrees C, 113 hectare. Health advisories were issued and power disruptions occurred. Light rain is expected to offer relief. United States President Donald Trump claimed the U.S. possesses a golden share in United States Steel Corp., suggesting potential influence over its acquisition by Nippon Steel Corp. Relations between the U.S. and China may be warming, although President Xi Jinping declined an invitation from President Trump to attend the UN General Assembly in September, and Premier Li Qiang will attend instead. Turning to the Korean Peninsula, a quiet now prevails along the inter-Korean border, as both Pyongyang and Seoul have halted their loudspeaker broadcasts. North Korea ceased its broadcasts shortly after South Korea took similar action. Analysts suggest this pause does not necessarily signal a shift in North Korea's broader stance on reconciliation. Gibraltar, aiming to solidify its post-Brexit status, is set to implement a 15% sales tax on goods. This transaction tax is deemed acceptable by the EU and forms an integral part of a larger agreement. The deal would potentially see Gibraltar integrated into the Schengen zone and establishing a customs union link. Meanwhile, in Spain, Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez issued a public apology. This followed an investigation into a close associate from his Socialist Party concerning alleged involvement in a kickback scheme. The scandal has stirred political tensions in the country. Across Europe, specifically in tourist hotspots like Barcelona and Lisbon, activists are preparing for coordinated protests. These demonstrations, planned for June 15th, are aimed at highlighting the adverse effects of over-tourism, a phenomenon increasingly referred to as touristification. The activists seek to raise awareness about the challenges faced by local communities. Northern Ireland is grappling with escalating unrest, fueled by anti-migrant sentiments. A leisure centre in Larne, housing individuals who had been displaced from Ballymena, was deliberately set ablaze. This incident led to accusations from Michelle O'Neill, who alleged that Duke Minister Gordon Lyons had exacerbated racial tensions through his public statements regarding the centre's function. The unrest spread to Ballymena, where rioters clashed with police forces. Over 3 nights, 9 police officers sustained injuries from petrol bombs, masonry, and fireworks. Arson attacks have also targeted homes and refuge sites, revealing a widespread pattern of anti-migrant violence. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has issued an apology to voters. He has, however, refused to call for a snap election, despite a high-profile resignation within his party. The resignation stems from ongoing corruption allegations. These allegations target several officials within Sanchez's government, as well as members of his family, adding to the political turmoil. Turning to the Philippines, President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is hinting at a possible pivot towards stronger relations with Beijing. This shift has sparked debate about a potential softening in his approach to China, possibly influenced by economic considerations. Despite this, some analysts remain unconvinced, pointing to his earlier, tougher policies concerning China. South Africa is grappling with the aftermath of severe weather in the Eastern Cape province. Torrential rains and powerful winds have caused widespread destruction. Tragically, the death toll has climbed to 78, and rescue operations remain ongoing. Turning to China, there's a notable trend of African students choosing Chinese universities. These institutions are becoming a preferred alternative to Western counterparts. Factors contributing to this shift include attractive government scholarships, lower tuition costs, and simplified visa procedures. Europe is experiencing a surge in support for far-right political parties, some of which are now part of national governments. Despite this trend, some parties, like Germany's AfD, continue to face political isolation. Meanwhile, NVIDIA is aggressively pursuing growth opportunities within Europe, focusing on forging new alliances and investing in the development of AI factories. In Germany, CEO Jensen Huang unveiled plans for the world's first industrial artificial intelligence cloud specifically designed for European manufacturers. The strategic expansion occurs amidst declining sales for NVIDIA in China, attributed to the impact of U.S. export restriction. Kenya is currently experiencing heightened tensions as protests ignite in Nairobi after the death of blogger Albert Ojwang in police custody. The demonstrations reflect widespread anger and demand accountability regarding police behavior, particularly in light of previous incidents of police brutality. The use of lethal force occurred during protests against the finance bill almost a year ago. Law enforcement has deployed tear gas in response to the present demonstrations. In Cuba, student protests are erupting in response to sharp increases in internet costs. This has fueled wider dissatisfaction with the existing communist regime. The Federation of University Students, FO, is calling for strikes and seeking answers from government ministers. Protesters are also demanding the FO president step down. Their grievances highlight ongoing problems, including electricity outages, water scarcity, transportation breakdowns, and rising food prices. The United States is ending temporary protected status for Afghans, potentially leading to the deportation of thousands. The decision occurs despite persistent Taliban threats and widespread instability in Afghanistan. Concerns are mounting about the safety of Afghans forced to return to their home country. Malaysia witnessed the acquittal of Muhammad Yusuf Rotha, a former aide to Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, on drug and firearms charges. Rotha claims the charges were politically motivated. Concurrently, a Facebook group is drawing intense public anger in Malaysia for its exploitation of schoolgirl images and sexually suggestive content, prompting widespread calls for police action. The number of forcibly displaced people worldwide, according to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, has surpassed 122 million. Despite this global displacement crisis, nearly 2 million Syrian refugees have returned to Syria. However, Middle East leaders and Western allies fear the Islamic State group might capitalize on any collapse of the Assad regime in Syria. This concern extends to Iraq, where the group could potentially regain a foothold. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, 2 separate boat accidents on Lake Tumba in Equateur Province have claimed at least 32 lives, with many more still unaccounted for. One of the boats was carrying around 30 passengers, including students, when it capsized due to adverse weather. Oman is set to host a pivotal sixth round of negotiations between Iran and the United States this Sunday, seeking to de-escalate tensions and find common ground on key issues. Turning to Ukraine, German Defense Minister Boris Pistorius has arrived to confer on additional military assistance from Berlin, underscoring Germany's continued support in the face of ongoing conflict. Meanwhile, Italy received a ruling from the European Court of Human Rights, which determined that it was not responsible for the actions of the Libyan Coast Guard in a 2017 migrant boat sinking, a decision likely to spark further debate on migrant rescue obligations. In the United States, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth appeared to confirm the existence of Pentagon contingency plans for the potential forced takeover of Greenland and Panama, though he declined to elaborate, raising concerns about U.S. foreign policy. Domestically, the Supreme Court decided that a Georgia family can sue the FBI for damages stemming from an erroneous raid on their home, establishing an exception to law enforcement immunity. Shifting focus to Bangladesh, Nobel laureate Yunus, aged 84, has clarified that he has no interest in joining the next elected government, as the nation prepares for elections, slated for the first half of April 26. Across the Pacific, El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele is reportedly intensifying his crackdown on dissent, a move some observers attribute to his alignment with U.S. President Donald Trump. In South Sudan, a dire warning has been issued by 3 United Nations agencies regarding an impending famine in a region plagued by violent conflict, highlighting the urgent need for humanitarian intervention. Palau's president is championing the development of a new economic classification index. This is to better reflect the profound socioeconomic vulnerabilities faced by island nations, which he believes are inadequately captured by GDP alone. Recent reports indicate that Sudanese paramilitaries have announced the capture of a strategically important area bordering Libya and Egypt, potentially altering the regional security landscape. Finally, Singapore is promoting active aging through initiatives such as the Ma Flipper Bowl Team, Ama meaning grandmother, an effort to engage its elderly population in physical activity. And that's a wrap for today's news, because even headlines need a nap. Stay curious, stay kind, and let the noise fade as you find your quiet. Take care, stay awesome, and I'll see you next time on WHAM Today.